Hey guys, this is the fourth installment of our conversation of Roland Barthes' Camera Lucida. This is the Noetic podcast, which is now available on the Noetic app in the Apple Store and the Google Play for your iPhone and Droid. So if you like this, make a donation. Okay, let's get back into it, buddy.
Let's do it.
So we are going to cover chapters 35 through 41 in this episode. Or we're actually, hopefully we can cover... I don't know. I'll try to finish the book, but I don't know.
I think we can
finish the book. Let's finish the book. All right. Was there anything from the previous podcast that you wanted to go over?
No, I think we left on a good part where we can just move on to the next chapter.
All right. So this immobilized moment that presents a long gone reality, I thought that led Barthes to posit that there may be at least two punctum. Okay? Mm-hmm. So far, we've talked about the contrasting detail, the wound, as a type of punctum, right? Mm-hmm. But then there's going to be what I think he's going to call, and I can't remember if this is his terminology or mine. So you'll have
might be yours, I think.
Okay. Well, I called it the temporal punctum. Mm-hmm. And it's this feeling of, like, when we look at a photograph, it's like we have this feeling that the subject of the photograph is like, this will be, this has been. And it reminds us of our mortality. We feel vertiginous witnessing something so alive that is dead or soon will be dead. So, like, anything that has got a subject is going to have this sort of temporal dimension to it, right? Mm-hmm. Where it sort of captures its being in here. The thing that troubled me about it from last podcast and spilling over into this one was with looking at the photo of his mother. He doesn't talk about this temporal punctum as much as he talks about his mother's essence. Mm-hmm. And the thing I want to know is, it seems like every photograph of a person is going to have a temporal punctum if you look for it, right? Like, so even... You know, if we're just looking at something that a photojournalist had done about a soldier in Vietnam and there's no contrasting punctum or whatever, there's still going to be the person that's a part of it. This is a slice of their life. There is this being that was underneath this thing. It's this referent, this thing that was actually alive and frozen. But it's not necessarily going to be interesting to us because it may not have captured the essence. And he talks about how he goes through hundreds of pictures of his mother and doesn't find her essence. Mm-hmm. But presumably her temporal punctum was there the entire time. What I'm trying to understand here is, what's the difference between temporal punctum and essence? Mm-hmm. If temporal punctum is present in every photograph, then what is essence? How do you understand essence? Can it even be talked about?
I think this is where, I think you're jumping to the end, and I think this is where he sort of makes the claim of whether the essence can even be articulated. And I think that's where he finds photographs as a mad art, which we're going to get into at the end, which is going to be really
resist systemization.
Cool. Right, even though it does confirm that something exists, it can't give us that certainty of what a being is, or we can't prove it. That is the crazy part about it, and that may be him trying to not show the Winter Garden photograph of his mother is a way to protect that personal part of the photograph. That perhaps that essence that he's describing, this thing about the photograph that best displays his mother, can't really be articulated in a way for everybody to understand.
Well, I think so, but I guess we would have to say, my startup disk. I think what we would have to say is that the essence is going to be not obvious to anyone, even if it is there. Mm-hmm. So I guess the question would be, so like he uses the example of his mother, right? Where he finally finds this picture of her as a little girl where her essence is captured. But he says that the photographer taking the picture didn't even realize that he was distilling her essence onto the media, that it took him. So I guess the question is, does that mean that the essence is in us? That we're projecting the essence onto the thing? Or does it take a skilled knowledge of the thing being photographed to discern the essence that's in the photograph. How do you shake out on that?
I think perhaps it's a question of, I think, like you said, the knowledge of the person in the photograph, or not. Because I think he uses... I think we're getting too far ahead. Let's go on to the next, because I think once we get to the end, I think we can really talk about this.
Sure.
Again, he talks about photography being a mad art and how we can't really talk about the essence, but I think that's something that will have to be explained at the end, and where I can maybe make an analogy that will be brought up at the end that perhaps can help us. I don't want to get too far ahead.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll slow my roll. All right. So, something I wanted to ask you, though, I mean, do you think that there's a temporal punctum in every photograph that involves a person?
What do you think? You seem a little...
I think there is.
I think there is, too.
I think there's always going to be a thing there. So then, like, if you really want to try hard enough, you can find it. And then if there is a temporal punctum there, there's always, even in the lack of there being this other sort of punctum, this contrasting detail... If you sort of get caught up in this sort of frozen moment of alive and dead, this pinned butterfly that is the photograph of the person, you're going to be able to find every photograph mesmerizing in its own way.
Well, do you think that maybe then is just
It's like a portal to someone else's being.
Sure. Or do you think that's just the nature of photography in general? Maybe we're not talking just about a specific punctum, but the punctum of photography, period.
Yeah. Well, then, yeah, I just wonder if that contradicts a lot of what he said earlier, and if we're okay with him contradicting with what he said earlier.
Fine.
Like
Whitman says, I contain multitudes, right? Like, sure, I contradict myself, that's fine.
Yeah. Well, I am large, I contain multitudes.
Yeah, I am large, I contain multitudes. Who cares? Yeah.
Or something to that effect. I love that quote. That was one of my favorite Whitman quotes.
No, but I think what's really interesting is that, and I think maybe going back to the cinema argument, is that he's saying that this temporal punctum means that that moment, like you said, is without future. So with a cinema, when we see 2 minutes of a film, we know there's a future within that film, that 4 or 5 minutes later that there will be some sort of action going on. But with a photograph, it's sort of, like you said, pinned up on the wall, and that there's no future, and that the flux is gone, and that history is made real with a photograph. That, like, yes, that thing happened at that time, that it's not going on again and again, that history is made real. I think that's the really fascinating part about a photograph that Barthes really nails, is that history is put spatially on a piece of paper. Like, we can't deny that person wasn't there in the photograph.
All right. So in chapters 42 through 48, and maybe this is already, maybe we've already sort of said this enough. Let me read my notes and let me see if anything new can come out of it. So I thought he had sort of this contradiction on the nature of temporal punctum, and I think maybe we've already resolved it. But A, every photo seems capable of capturing the essence of the self, giving us the sense of interacting with a specter or a ghost. Mm-hmm. And then B, whether or not that essence is acknowledged is predicated on how the individual responds to the photo, i.e. he finds her essence in a photograph of her as a child. We still want to table this, yeah? So we'll come back to it later. Okay, and I asked, is photographs essence predicated on individual perception, or is it there all along? Does every photo capture the likeness but not her essence? Mm-hmm. We've sort of addressed all that. All right, sorry about that. I think we covered a lot of what I wanted to say about these chapters.
Sure. I mean, I think one interesting thing, talking about the temporal element and about the essence and everything, is that he makes this really important distinction between photography and other art forms, like painting and literature, even sculpture, that these other mediums can't do what photography does. They can't say for certain that that person existed, that thing happened, that they have to use, I think, what he calls memory, reconstitution, imagination, to give us this event or give us this person as they quote-unquote were. And that with that, at least for Barthes, that there's this sort of suspicion that like maybe you're glossing over such and such an event. That it's not intrinsic with the medium in itself. But with photography, you cannot debate that that thing was there. And I think that's a really, to me, a very fascinating and profound distinction, is that there's no, to him, fiction or artifice in photography, that to him, as he calls it, is sort of a violent medium, that it portrays what the thing is right at the bat, and it doesn't really let you try to add memory or any kind of thing to it at the initial conception of it. What do you think of that? I find that completely fascinating. Unless you're just reading your notes.
I am looking over my notes and doing that too. But I mean, yeah, I mean, at the same time, like, right, it doesn't allow, because it is so accidental. I wouldn't say accidental, so unpreplanned. Yeah, I mean, I think that is pretty revolutionary with a lot of art, that you can't conceptualize it in advance.
Right. I mean, and think of how many portraits. I don't know, we look at portraits, drawn of famous people, and we think that's them, but it's not. It's not. We can't say for sure that that person existed at that time in that way. But with a photograph, I can say, yes, that is Arthur Schopenhauer. Where if I saw a painting of him, I'd be like, I don't know if Arthur Schopenhauer looked like that. Like, I don't think that's him. But if we look at a photograph of him, we say, yes, that's Arthur Schopenhauer.
Yeah, I mean, portraiture painting was essentially like the original Photoshop. And what's interesting now is, like, with all the photos that we see, like, and there's so much photoshopping going on, is that when does a photograph become a painting? Mm-hmm. Right? Like,
can it ever become a painting? Is it like,
I think it can. I think it can. Like, if you've got like these, like, when we look at women on like magazine covers and things like that who have been like really, really photoshopped, like, maybe we should not be thinking about those as photos, but idealized images, which is precisely what the portraiture artist in painting was trying to do. You know.
Yeah, that's
make my nose smaller, make this smaller, make this bigger.
That's another. I feel like that's another book in general, because then you're combining. Okay, that person was there, but they weren't there because, like you said, it's a kind of idealized version of themselves. But they are there because that is actually them. We actually took a photograph of them, but we sort of messed with it a little.
Yeah,
that essential truth is there for Barthes, I think. Like, the essential truth is like, yes, that person was there at that time, but like you said, maybe this is the makeup on the dead corpse sort of thing. That maybe Photoshop is this sort of really extreme and grotesque form of caking on the makeup to make the corpse look like they have bigger breasts or a smaller waist or defined six-pack or something of that nature.
Yeah, I wonder, because it would seem like to me, with enough Photoshop, the photograph becomes a painting. Mm-hmm. I think the question for me is, what is that tipping point? Yeah. And not being able to define it, it seemed like if you touch it at all,
right?
Like, maybe you've taken it out of photography and you've put it into painting. Mm-hmm. I don't know where else. I don't know where else you would draw that line.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess what I'm kind of hitting at, or like, is that the temporal element is there, or the temporal punctum part is there, that person was there at that time. Yet there is a part about them that you can't really pinpoint because it's not really them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Where like maybe
it's definitely not their essence.
Right, where maybe if we go back to the surprise part, that there is a lot of artifice in that any kind of punctum that could be gained by, say, I don't know, cellulite or whatever is sort of taken away because people have already ironed that out. But again, what makes it different from painting is that we can't deny that let's use, I don't know, Playboy model. That model was there at that time taking that picture. That if you drew a Playboy model, there is still that inkling of suspicion inherent in the medium of painting. But inherent in the medium of photography, we know for certain that person was there, regardless of how touched up it is. We know that person is there.
Yeah, I just don't.
Maybe that's what I'm getting. Yeah,
in painting, we don't necessarily know if the reference there. It could be something.
No,
it could be like an amalgamized image from history.
Oh, sure, and genre. I mean, there's such thing as genre paintings as well, where people just drew famous figures.
Yeah,
in different disparate poses because it was sort of a thing that sold. I mean,
just imagine if we had a photo of Jesus compared to what people have rendered Jesus to be.
Sure, I don't even. Yeah,
I think I saw the History Channel did something like that. It looks very different from the archaeological information. It indicates they look very different from sort of the.
Yeah, I believe it, and that's a really great example too of the idea.
The '70s rock star.
Yeah, Jesus Christ Superstar. Yeah, exactly. No, that's a very good example.
Yeah.
Of that.
So I think it was kind of interesting in chapter 46. I've been sort of pondering about this, whether or not temporal punctum and essence coincide. And Barthes talks about that which has been, which I take to be the temporal punctum, that unsettling feeling of the thing that's sort of crossing over into the other side or whatever, corresponding with the essence of the photograph on occasion. So that says to me that the essence and the temporal punctum are in fact separable and different things. And so when I think about that, I was actually able to create an inventory of the types of images that we're talking about here. So the first one was that I was able to figure out that there would be photographs with formal punctum, studium, referent, temporal punctum that advenes, and we don't know if it captured. Let me say it again. So photographs with formal punctum, studium, and temporal punctum. We don't know if it captures the essence, but because it has the formal punctum, the studium, and the temporal punctum, it should advene. Okay? Now, then, if we can perceive the essence in that photograph that has temporal, formal, and punctum, and studium, then we have the most intense feelings of attachment to that photo. Okay. Right? So that would be the most ideal situation, right? Like we see the being in it. We have this, whatever this sort of nameless essence is, the contrasting detail, the formal punctum, and the general scene. And so then if we start subtracting things, if we took away the formal punctum, that contrasting detail, if we were imaginative enough, we would still be able to see the temporal punctum and the essence, and that doesn't seem like it would really deter our engagement in the photograph. And then if we were to, denude it even more, what if there is no discernment of essence, just studium and temporal punctum, which everything seems like it may have, so long as it contains a person? And that still may be enough to the attuned spectator to be intrigued and set off adventure. I don't know. So on the one hand, it seems like with the right education, we can delight in any photo, which is awesome. But we've been talking about how Barthes is trying to get this sort of science of photography and whatnot. It is becoming increasingly difficult to schematize good and bad photographs. What do you think about all of that I just said? Cool? Not cool? Illuminating?
Sure, yeah, I don't know. It's a lot of words, so I don't know. I just took it, yeah.
What do you think?
I think it makes sense. I mean, it's kind of like just schematizing there's some photographs that you get and some photographs you don't get, or at least that have these sort of elements, and you just kind of put and squared it, I think, in some sense. In some way, I thought. I don't know. Maybe I wasn't listening all the way through, unfortunately.
It kind of became Ben Stein, the physics geek there.
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, but maybe that's. I think what you're getting at was what you just said, is that there are photographs that maybe we get and maybe photographs that we don't get necessarily, but maybe he's just trying to show just how confounding photographs are. I think that's just the whole mission, at least.
Well, the thing that I think is super interesting is every photograph in Camera Lucida is a picture of what?
Usually of a person.
Of a person. And so, if
besides, there's some that are actually photographs of a still life or, of a table. And then there is that one of the building or the Alhambra in
But
Spain.
there's a boy leaning against it.
There is a boy.
Yeah.
But he doesn't focus on the boy as much.
But
I know
you know what I'm saying?
The human element
but
is there.
I guess what I'm saying is, if there are all these layers to a photograph that allow us to appreciate it and be deeply intrigued by it, it seems like if we just try hard enough, any photograph will work for us, will really capture our attention. Then what I wonder is it the fact that there's a person in it? Like, can we say that all this stuff applies to landscapes or pictures of dogs or pictures of pictures? I guess what I'm wondering is if that is the line of demarcation between what makes for a good photograph and a bad photograph after he's illustrated all these criteria for what makes for a good one that contains a person. Maybe lesser photographs just don't have people in them. What do you think about that?
I think what he's trying to get at is not so much that humans make photographs. I think he's just talking about anything that people, if we're talking about photos that people like, is that it's anything that pierces us, whether it be an admired person, an admired place, an admired animal, an admired cup of water, that there's something about these things that strike us as temporal, or at least that give us this sort of thing that enthralls us, or that, again, the punctum that pierces us, and we want to try to delve into its essence, say, like, what is this thing? What is this thing? Because it's quote-unquote authenticated by the photo, because we know it exists in time, that it existed some way, somehow. It could be alive, though more often than not it's dead. But it could be alive, but we know it's also, it could be dead, and that it will die if that's the case. But we know that photography sort of authenticates, I think, whatever, even if it's a location. I think anything beyond a human, I think that's what Barthes is getting at, is that it authenticates a thing and lets you know that that thing existed at the time that the photographer took that picture.
I don't disagree. I just think that there might be some things that are more valuable than others. I guess
again, maybe it's all in the eyes of the observer.
But I started to think, when you rattled off the list of other things that could be possibly, intriguing in photographs, like buildings, or what else, animals, and what was something else you mentioned?
A cup of water.
A cup of water. Yeah. Even if there's not a person in the photo, the absence, the lack of the person, the noticeable not person, might seem to be the thing that makes it an animating and interesting photograph. Like, for instance, if there's a picture of a cup of water, right? I don't know if that's particularly interesting unless maybe there's some lipstick on the cup, or if the craftsmanship of the cup. Or if you're looking at a building, I don't know if the building is necessarily interesting unless a human has imposed architectural form on it, or there's a cannonball divot in the side of it as a result of human interaction. Or if there's an animal, I don't know if the animal is interesting unless, like, a human has, I don't know, like, if it's like a poodle dyed its hair blue. I'm not really sure. But
do you think that temporal element, that human element, or just the temporal element, which I think you're implying with human interaction, do you think that's not in a photograph, say, of a still life? That was the first. I think what we need to note is that he does include the first photograph ever taken, and it is of a table.
Oh yeah, he does do that.
It is of a table, and he even makes note that maybe they sort of had a notion that photography is sort of like painting, because hey, let's take a picture of a still life, something people would paint. And yet, Barthes mentions that, maybe then they realize that they're dealing with this really unique sort of mutant of a medium, because unlike painting, where we can draw or really flesh out the still life, we can paint the still life. There's still this, because inherent. I keep going back to the medium itself. Inherent in the medium of painting there is artifice, there is memory being used, that it's not actually the thing, there is an intermediary between the thing and its temporal element, I guess. But with photography, I think what he's trying to say is that regardless of whatever you take a picture of, even if there is no quote-unquote human interaction, that thing, because it's, and maybe, you know what, maybe the photograph is actually a human interaction.
That's what I was going to say.
That maybe taking the picture is proof that this thing happened at that time, and that, you know, again, using the whole Heraclitus thing, that it's not that, you know, now, or that maybe it's never there. It wasn't there ever. It's not going to be like that ever again.
Well, he includes the picture of that first photograph. It is a still life, but it's like so crude, right?
Sure.
Crude compared to anything that was done 50 years ago or 100 years ago.
Sure.
It's so incredibly crude, but to me, what's interesting about that photograph is that it's a testament to human ingenuity. That it's like, I mean, that photograph to me, even though there's no person in the still life photo, is the equivalent of a moon landing. Because that photograph symbolizes our world is about to get weird.
Yeah.
Our world is about to radically change. This whole notion of having your likeness put on media or whatever that was reserved for kings and queens, now everyone, even pieces of fruit, get it. And guess what? And man, through his preternatural intelligence, was able to create a machine that will do this.
Sure. Or authenticate somebody's being, or that somebody existed in a way that perhaps a painting could not. Or that a painting, again, I mean, I keep mentioning this, but had to use memory or artifice or any kind of thing, or even literature as well. You know, there is always fiction some way that you cannot, quote unquote, objectively present something in these mediums. But like you said, now we presented something with, you know, sans touch up, can project what a thing is right then and there, that thing happened at that time, at that place, and that, like we said, maybe like the temporal part, it will die. Yeah, I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I just can't get the human element out of it, but I'm sure.
Oh, sure, no, and I think you can, because again, I think like we just kind of both came to a conclusion that you need a person to make a photograph, you know. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's, I guess, close it out here with chapter 48.
I think we got to close out with how he finds photography so mad, or he at least in the final chapters, he compares it to madness, to insanity.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, did you get anything out of that little?
Yeah,
bit?
I thought this was.
Or what do you think about his little thing of madness, or what did that entail for you?
I thought so. I think the thing is that he talks about it being a mad art, and you have to figure out what it is for it to be mad. Like, what is it? What sort of societal conventions is it rebelling against? And I think, that there are certain sort of impediments that allow for us to fall in love, to experience the madness of falling in love with a photograph within modern society. And he talks about, we are bombarded with images more than ever or whatever. But what tends to happen is, right, with the commercialized society, is that we have all these images of what life ought to be, right? Like what the ideal woman looks like, what the ideal man looks like, what the ideal life looks like. And like we have all these sort of images, but like really that's sort of getting in the way of us really enjoying the medium of photography and having that sort of mad love for it. Yeah. And so what we really have to do is sort of radically absolutize the particular again and get away from those airbrush, staged, kind of banal, commercialized photos and get back in touch with sort of like the real gritty reality of mimesis that is the photograph.
So what is that?
I think
because you're getting at a really important part, or at least how society, to Barthes, tries to push this madness back.
Well, I think so. I think there are two ways. I think he's concerned that photography is going to be turned into an art form.
Right.
Like,
well, let's try to say how photography is mad first. Why?
Well, because I think what would make it mad would be that it flaunts the rules of convention. And so in one way, it flaunts the rules of convention by not engaging in commercialized society, right? And so that anything that sort of like goes against what is established to be like typical modernity. Mm-hmm. And so I imagine that would be capturing scenes and people and things sort of underrepresented in the visual bombardment of modernity mm-hmm. would be a way to defy the rules of photographic modernity.
That's interesting. I don't think that's what I got from this thing on madness.
Yeah.
Or it seemed to me just to be like everything that we were talking about so far is that, at least to quote him, that there's this, it's false on the level of perception, but it's true on the level of time. It's sort of a temporal hallucination that, yes, that thing existed, but it's not there again. Like you said, like we can't really get, and maybe comes back to your essence saying, like, can we really get the essence? I think Barthes saying, like, we can't. We can't prove. The essence is unprovable. But we can prove that the thing is there. And in that paradox lies this sort of really just, like, I don't really know, like, what to make of photography, and that creates a sort of insanity. And he describes it in one sense as pity. And if I can quote him, he says, you know, in describing maybe a photograph that pierced him or that gave him this punctum, that he says, you know, I passed beyond the unreality of the thing represented, and I entered crazily into the spectacle, into the image, taking into my arms what is dead, what is going to die, and just hugging it. And he compares it to when Nietzsche apparently just went down on his knees and before he was put into the asylum and hugged that horse that was getting whipped. Right? That it's sort of this really weird emotion of just like you're just trying to grasp this thing that you can't really grasp, and yet you know it's almost like when somebody calls you crazy, you're like, yes, like that thing is there, that thing is there, that thing is there, and like you're like, no, it's not. Like, can you prove it? And you're like, well, and they're like, you're fucking crazy, get out of here. That maybe photography has that again, like where we can't really like get at the essence of it, but we know it's there, but we can't, and it's just
Well, I think we're saying the same thing. We've just emphasized different parts of it.
Perhaps, Maybe
so when I was talking about how you had to radically absolutize the particular and get at that sort of apparition and specter of the thing or whatever against the social conventions of modernity. The problem is the images of modernity create like a hollow dream world, right? So the perfect woman, the perfect car, the perfect...
you're saying they pretend they have the essence.
They pretend to have a referent, but they have no referent. Right. And the thing that you're talking about is those images that are mad, that drive us mad, have a referent. Whereas these other ones that are universalized and like I keep having these images of like Times Square and like all the images that are bombarded in Times Square, and how all of that is just like fake.
Right. And fake because
there's no, it's all constructed, it's all fabricated, it's all airbrushed, it's all glamorized. Whereas the photographs that you're talking about drive us mad because we can sense the reality and unreality at the same time. Whereas the photos of modernity, we just sense their unreality. Right. We know there's no at its base real being.
And I don't know, maybe we can add to that, and I'd be curious to see what you're saying. And I think I said it before, is that perhaps these photographs that you're talking about pretend that one can get at the essence of photography and say like, yes, this is the ideal blank, the ideal blank, the ideal blank. But we can't really prove. No, and so then when you secure, and then when you think if they trick you into thinking that this is like ideality and that it's obtainable or something like that, and what happens when people secure those things? Yeah, they aren't mad. And I guess what would be the opposite of madness? I think it'd be boredom. Sure, it would be totally. So you get the ideal, and it's just totally uninteresting. Yeah. It's a vacuous image. Yeah, and what's really interesting too is that he also says, like you said, in one sense, society tries to tame art by making it banal, but then he says, the other way is that you can make photography into an art. And that is really, like, I don't know what you thought of that. It's kind of like, what?
Well, I think that's going to be upsetting to a lot of people.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, what? Like, no, I thought I was a crazy photographer. And I thought
Well, I think he thinks that if photography gets treated like painting and gets put up in exhibitions and there's like a velvet rope and things like that this does violence to...
or maybe to the temporal element, right?
He says it tames it in some way. Like, so if we put photographs in a museum, I don't know. I mean, we're not interacting with them the right way. That encourages the sort of proper madness. So if you and I go to a museum where there's a bunch of photography, we just go, and kind of look at it. Whereas, like, maybe if we were actually able to hold the damn thing, like, we experienced the madness of like crying into our pillow because like we saw something true and real and it's like just too intense for us. Yeah. But if it's behind the rope and you cannot touch and you cannot take a picture of it and all this other bullshit, right? Like, how does it really move you?
Yeah, maybe that goes into a point that maybe we didn't really gloss over, but maybe is worth going into now, is the idea of photography being a private thing, experiences that
he talks about it, picking the photos up and putting them down and walking around with them.
And just saying that like look, this is like something that is just between me and the photograph in itself. Like,
hence why he didn't share the picture of his mother.
Right? Yeah, it might be one of the reasons too. And he almost compares it to prayer, or how in the Middle Ages that they went from public prayer and public reading to a sort of private sort of prayer and a private sort of reading. And that's a really crazy thing to kind of think about. I remember reading about an account of St. Ambrose, and this is from St. Augustine, if we want to bring it back into our whole great thinkers.
Our great thinkers series on Noetic.
Yeah. No, I remember St. Augustine saying like, it's really interesting because during this time, everybody usually would read out loud, regardless of where you were. That, all the monks and all the people in the abbot, whatever, wherever they're at, would read out loud. So then even if somebody was passing by, they might be able to hear it, and then they might be able to go and help them. And also, I mean, there's probably other elements to that as well. But then he said, like, you know what? St. Ambrose, like, he's reading, but he's not saying anything out loud, and it was sort of looked as this like really weird and antisocial and strange thing. And I find that very fascinating, is that we still retain that even in photography today. We don't necessarily, we're not showing everybody our photographs. That when we are scrolling through, we're usually looking at by ourselves. But that doesn't take into account, I think, something that also kind of might add another foil to this.
That's so interesting.
It's when you say, hey, look at this photograph. Yeah, look at this. But isn't that the same thing when you're like, and you take out your wallet and say, hey, look at my kid? But I think at the essence of it, even when we look at photographs on our phones, we're looking at it by ourselves. And there's that great line that we're alone together, right? So it's like you're alone looking at the photograph. There's still the privacy element that Barthes talks about.
Well, so then the question is social media turning photographs into a giant art gallery, or is it making it deeply personal? The fact that I can like scroll through photos on my phone, just like I could interact with the photos on my wall and my family. Sure.
I mean, I think social media shares something with a medium that Barthes had to encounter, or probably encounter daily, which is the newspaper, that people are, in a sense, beyond certain intricacies, looking at the same news feed, if I can use the word in both sense of the term, that there are going to be things similar. And let's just focus on the things that are similar in people's news feed. Like maybe if we have the same group of friends and like the same pages, we will see the same thing. And that a newspaper is going to be seen by many people and yet you are the only one looking at it when you experience it at that time. So does that thing of it being experienced by many people take away from the privacy, or is it the immediate experience of taking in the photograph by yourself really keeping in that privacy that Barthes really celebrates in observing photography?
I hadn't thought about it. I have to experiment on it. I don't know. But
I'm just throwing out questions. Yeah,
no, it's not private.
Interesting.
It doesn't.
It's
feel,
private, but it's not private, which
feel,
is really wild.
Yeah, it doesn't feel personal. Now, if someone were to send you a photograph that was meant for your eyes only, and you were to look at it like in your smartphone gallery or whatever, and it doesn't have to be licentious. It can just be like
I understand
like a private moment. That you don't want. You want it to be special. I mean.
Sure, that might be something different.
Yeah, those are different photos. I think those have a different emotional hue. Something that, by the way, this whole thing, this is making me reminisce. You're a lot younger than me, but I actually lived through a time where I had photos of my family in my wallet, and what an insane concept that sounds like now. Do you have any pictures in your wallet?
I used to of an old flame.
Yeah, but I definitely don't have any pictures in my wallet. Yeah. But yeah, when I was a kid, I had my wallet when I was a kid, and I had all sorts of pictures in there. Sure. And how that's gone away.
Yeah, I don't think it's too alien though, because we just reach into our phone and we can pull out any kind of photo and say, hey, look, this is my dog. Hey, look, this is me when I was at that party 2 weeks ago and I was totally drunk. Hey, look, this is my mom. Hey,
so long as they're private ones or special ones. Well, the other thing the other point I wanted to talk about here is like we were talking about photographs and religion and things like that. I wonder if there is something pharisaical about putting photos in exhibitions, and it would be kind of like going to church on TV. Like you're taking this sort of like sacred experience and making it super public. Yeah, and like that, just like maybe Barthes by emphasizing the human role in all these subjects and how it's like this sort of like capturing of an essence of being, it almost feels like if you really dwell on it, maybe there's like a religious layer to these things, and we are when we take photographs, we are sort of capturing some divinity of people, and when we put them in a museum,
sure,
we're turning them into commodities or products or things to be sold to the highest bidder, and there's something, I don't know, kind of dehumanizing about it.
Sure, to take a very, very qualitative thing, and dare I say subjective thing as well, in the photograph, and in trying to observe a photograph and find a punctum that is personal to you, just as it was for Barthes and his mother's photograph, and to, like you said, not even objectify it, but just make it into a product, or make it into something that one can rate, as if you could rate punctum, like, oh, that thing is more punctum than the other painting, therefore it's going to win the show for best photo with punctum. Yeah, best photo with punctum, you know what I mean? Like, you can't do that. Again, I mean, maybe this goes to, the whole kind of individualistic sort of experience of the photograph, and maybe you could throw Kierkegaard in here, you know what I mean? But, like, the importance of the individual in taking in an aesthetic experience, you know what I mean? That is deeply, I think, in Barthes' mission here. And I think that's what makes this a deeply personal work, at least for me, to read, and I think which makes the second part, which we've explored, at least in these 2 episodes, different.
Maybe that's
makes it to demarcate, because he kind of says like, yeah, I'm going to look at photos that I like in the first, and he makes that even the case in the first part too. He's like, look, I'm not looking at all photographs. Like, I don't give a fuck about the history of photography. I'm just looking at stuff that I like, all right? And like, let's just go from there. Like, I'm more interested in like what the wound, like why. He makes a great. Oh, I have to look up the quote. But he goes to Friedrich Nietzsche, and he's talking about photography as a sort of labyrinthine sort of art, and that the photograph to him was sort of his thing at the middle of the labyrinth that he was trying to find. And he uses this quote by Nietzsche in which he says, let's see if I can find it real quick. Aha. Where Nietzsche says, a labyrinthine man never seeks the truth, but only his Ariadne. Which is the woman, I guess, in mythology who is at the middle of the labyrinth. Or I guess, the woman at the middle of the labyrinth that such and such Greek hero was trying to save from such and such Greek monster. So I think what he was trying to say was that this photo for me is important not because it told me some kind of truth, where it got to me because that it has some kind of treasure in the middle. But he was drawn to this photograph because it sort of gave him a look into why he was drawn to photograph in the first place. Why he liked photographs. What drew him in. And I think that is a really great lesson in the sense that, sometimes it takes some sort of thing, whether it be a photograph, a piece of art, a certain football player, a drink, to kind of show us why we got into these things in the first place. And that sometimes that personal experience is a good place to start in exploring the essence, quote unquote, the essence, or just exploring something in general. You know what I mean? I guess this idea that in the particular lies the universal. And I think that's sort of what Barthes'
and that's
mission has sort of been.
And I think part of me wonders, going back, I'm really starting to get hung up. I think I took it for granted about why he didn't include his mother in these photographs that are in the book. Maybe he felt there was something dehumanizing about including his mother in this display of other photographs, because he knew that this was going to be a book widely consumed, that would be sold. Maybe he thought there was something that did violence to something. Something approximating divinity. I don't know.
He even says that. Photography is a violent art in and of itself. Yeah. That it sort of just bombards you with an image and says, like, this is it. This is what happened. That, at some sense, you can't really reach into it and say, like, oh, no, wait, there's more. Or that there isn't really a kind of intermediary that is just, this is what happened. And it sort of slaps you in the face. And that maybe doing that, like you said, to his mother, or at least to a photograph of his mother, would be an injustice. Yeah. That the nature of photography might be too intense for a picture of his mother, or at least for the memory of his mother to himself to bear. That memory of his mother would not be able to take the weight of, of sharing this photograph. It's a very, again, it's such a poetic part, I think, of this book, is just an omission, Yeah. Where sometimes the best things are when you just don't include them, what I mean? Or it's absence. And I think
it's at least something to imagination.
Yes, it leads to imagination and just makes you wonder. But I think it's great that we're going into that, because I think, like we've touched on, that sort of personal part of photography is imperative to Barthes. And that it reflects a sort of love. It's love and death, it seems to me, that, a photograph that you love is going to incorporate love, and it's also incorporate death, because the thing you love is temporal, it's going to die, and yet there is something you love about it, but you can't really reach into it. And it's sort of like that great German word, Liebstud, like love death. It's sort of like a love death to me, like a really good photograph that you like. It's a Liebstud. It's sort of like
I'll let you have the last word. I think I thought this book was just about photography, but I don't think it's about photography. No. I think maybe I slept on the theological implications of this text.
Oh, just all the implications. And I think that's what's so cool about semiotics. And I think what's cool about Roland Barthes too, and at least his exploration, is that anything can be deeply personal and deeply effective and loaded with meaning, and that we why
don't we just call it what it is? It's deep. It seems like the things can be holy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I know philosophers don't want to talk about things like that, but like, I mean, we're talking about something that's unrepeatable. We're talking about subjects. We're talking about people or the lack of people. I mean,
well, maybe it goes back to love and death again. Because if you think of Christianity, I mean, love and death, I think, is at the heart of the message, especially Jesus' message. Correct? He loved you so much that he died. That God loved you so much he died for you. You know, that they love death. That even in great stories that loved ones die over somebody that they loved. You know, like all these different things. I think it comes down to those two things in some sense. And maybe love and death create a sort of holy element. I have no idea. But
it feels like it's getting there.
Yeah.
I don't know. Those are the words I want to use, but Barthes doesn't use those words at all.
But I think he uses like death. He uses death.
No, what I'm saying is the holy words. But I mean, he has such reverence.
But he does use Catholic. I mean, we didn't really go into, and I can't remember where he uses the idea of Catholic imagery, or at least he uses holy imagery, or at least holy words, at least in describing photography in some sense. And maybe we can go into that later on in another podcast, or at least a kind of footnote podcast. But I think he uses those kind of words somewhere, but maybe not at the gravity of which that we're speaking about it.
Yeah. I have a tendency to take things in a religious direction. That's always.
Oh no, that's okay. I mean, I think that's important, and I think maybe that's something that maybe is a little sidetracked to what Barthes and maybe what semiology is trying to tell us, that all these different means of communication are loaded with meaning and are inherently, maybe like you said, inherently holy, or that they inherently include an idea of our temporalness, and then maybe of some kind of love for something, that goes beyond ourselves, and that we can't really define. We know it's there, but we can't really define it. Almost kind of like a faith that, almost kind of like the absurdity of faith that kind of Kierkegaard goes into, where it's just like, it's crazy. But you know it's there. You know it's there, but you can't really get at it.
All I keep thinking about is this fleeting miracle of being. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I mean, it'd be interesting. I'm sure he's drawing a lot from Heidegger, and I know Heidegger had a weird sort of relationship with religion. So
and I think that's really cool. And again, I mean, I think I want to stress the point, and I think that's what Barthes is getting at, is that photography in and of itself is a unique miracle of being, and that to just gloss over it, and again I'll use the word half-assed, just to be half-assed about it and say oh, that's just painting, that's just that. No, Barthes says no, this is something completely different. We are not taking in the unique miracle of being that is photography, and of the implications of such an art that, like you said, when the first photograph happened, that weird stuff's gonna happen now that we have photography, and that to take in that, I think is what Barthes is trying to do. And at least, I mean, again, I don't know if he's trying to. I don't really look at this as a text where he's just saying this is this, this is this, this is this. I think he's just trying to, again, like you said very poignantly, say this is a unique miracle of being, and that we should look into this more and think about it more and try to understand it. And maybe not understand it, but try to maybe not even come to terms, but just to explore this weird mutant of a medium that is photography.
Man, I'll tell you what, we've had a lot of insights through the course of doing this thing, but I think tonight marks the night where I officially got my mind blown on camera. I'm just over here, I'm over here sort of beside myself with this sort of insight. I think, there have been lots of epiphanies, but the feeling that I'm having right now is totally different from any of the other times that we've discussed these big ideas.
Yay. No, maybe that's a feeling when they read. I mean, I know I definitely, I think especially this last section sort of, I think this piece, or the work, the text really kind of crescendos, or at least it builds up to this final section, at least for me, and to the little things that he talks about at the end. And maybe like the conversation, it sort of builds into this kind of like, wow, like this is pretty good. The implications of photography are more than just, yeah.
I think Schiller would really like photography. If this is the aesthetic condition that photography is supposed to put you in, and the reverence for mankind and all of that.
Yeah, I mean,
the potential political ends of good photography are becoming very apparent to me in this moment.
And
epiphany.
And does he not talk about that? Doesn't Barthes talk about the idea of photography being a kind of concealed art form in some senses, where people say, or some regimes try to stop certain photographs, or some people say like, oh, that reveals too much, or it speaks too much.
Well, what is it saying? It's speaking too much to the reality of the human being, the foibles and the dignity. In the case with the Nazis, it showed them to not be the superiors that they thought themselves to be. It was a leveling sort of effect. And in the case of repressed or suppressed people, I should say, it's a way of elevating them to an equal status. I hate to be a broken record, but I think it's subtly arguing for the case of the holiness of the individual. I don't know how else to say it. All right, high five. Maybe
thank you all.
Yeah, maybe we'll do more. But I mean, I think we're done with the book. But let's go back and listen to it, and maybe if we need to address some stuff, we will.
Again, yeah. I mean, I think what's interesting about this and about what we're doing and what we do when we look at a text, it reminds me of a really, I can't remember who said this, but they said a poem is never finished; it's only abandoned. Yeah. So I feel like a text is never finished, it's only abandoned, and that we're abandoning it now, but we're gonna go back to it many times and maybe try to look into it more. And then that's maybe what we all do when we look at certain works, whether it be philosophical or musical or literary, is that we sort of abandon it and then we come back to it with different insights. And just like, I mean, with the Barthes, we included in with Schiller and other thinkers, so I think it's all coming together. And again, I think this was really interesting, at least for me, on the receiving end of these insights too.
Yeah. All right, I gotta cut it off. It's a.
Thank y'all. Thank you, Roland. Thanks.
Bye, guys.